Okay, so welcome everybody to the third in our series of social enterprise webinars. This one is going to be about idea feasibility and screening. And basically, for the next several webinars, I'm going to be building off what Andy talked about in the Social Enterprise 201, getting into more detail about ideas, business planning, value proposition, business canvas, etc. But before we begin, I'll do a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that the land upon which our organization stands is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Apaktowick, PEI, Mi'kmaqi is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship, and we pay our respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this land for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. So I'm going to share my screen. Usually Christine is here doing this, but she's not here today. And so I am in charge. So I'm crossing my fingers that everything goes well. Can everyone see my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll just start at the beginning. I was clicking through these to make sure everything was there. So today we're going to be talking about idea identification and feasibility analysis, just going through if your organization is in the very preliminary stages, what a good process is for brainstorming your ideas, and then taking that through to narrowing down to your most feasible prospects, and then how to conduct a proper feasibility study, and then preliminary business planning. So this is a structured process that begins first with preparing who's going to be in the room, then moving to generating your ideas. And then you do sort of a quick screening so that in that initial generation of ideas, I always sort of say there's no bad ideas in a brainstorm. So everything sort of gets tossed out there. And then you do a quick screening to eliminate the ideas that aren't going to be very feasible. And then you pare it down to a few ideas that are sort of the best ideas out of that initial crop. And then you do a second screening, which I'll give some tips on how to do, both based on the financial prospects of the idea, as well as how well it fits within your organization. And then you would move to a formal feasibility study that would likely be conducted by a third party that has experience in that. And then from the results of that feasibility study, you would move into a business plan summary. So when you're looking at generating ideas, you'd want to review the mission of your organization and its objectives. So every social enterprise has the desired outcome of a combination of both financial returns and social impact, which is what Andy discussed a couple of weeks ago. And we want to understand those desired incomes and the relative priorities in order to provide criteria when we start to explore our ideas. As well, financial goals could be different depending on the size of your organization and how big the social enterprise's contribution is going to be. So it's not always going to be the same when you think in terms of large and small profit. So a large profit to a smaller organization could be in the $1,000, $10,000 range, but that might not be sufficient for a larger organization. So you really want to narrow it down for what is going to be for your organization. And then you're going to want to begin doing some early research, and you're going to be looking at the innovations that affect your clients and the industry. So you want to sort of think pretty big in the beginning. So think globally, what's going on around the world, what are the innovations around the world, and then think beyond the narrow definition of your industry. So you don't want to restrict yourself to just what your industry is doing. You want to look for parallels in other industries. So an example is if you're going to be developing a social enterprise that trains people, for example, with disabilities, so that they could go on and seek employment, like gain some employment experience and then find employment in other sectors. In addition to looking at organizations that work with people with disabilities, you could also look at organizations that are doing social enterprise where they're employing different groups of different disenfranchised people. So they could be people re-entering the workforce following recovery from an addiction, or leaving the prison system and re-entering the workforce. So those would be parallel industries. Now I don't know how to, oh, there we go. So as I mentioned initially, you're going to want to focus on the quantity and the creativity of ideas in the beginning stages. And initially, the quality is not as important as the quantity. So the brainstorm just is the throwing everything at the wall, get the ideas flowing. And sometimes an initial idea that doesn't necessarily fit the organization could then lead to discussion over other ideas. So you don't want to eliminate any ideas in these very early stages. It's important to bring together a group of all your stakeholders, so your board, your staff, and even some potential customers or clients. And then you collect as many ideas as you can that would be relevant to your desired outcomes, both social and financial. And in this early stage, personally, I am not great at idea generation. I have my own private business, and my business partner is really the innovator in that endeavor. And he's excellent at generating new ideas. And then I'm much better at, once we've planted that initial seed, I'm better at growing it and adding the flesh to the bones and developing it past its sort of embryonic stage and growing it up. So it's a good idea when you're looking at your organization, identifying people who are those early innovators, and then who's better at strategic planning, long-term planning, and who's better at maintenance. So everyone sort of has their strength. So if you can identify your innovative thinkers in that stakeholder group, then those are the people you might want to turn to when you're looking at this early idea stage. You'd also want to look at what your organization is already good at, because then you will likely be successful with another endeavor. Who are your customers who would be benefiting from the services?
Involving all of the member firms, and it's another way for them to share best practice or identify common issues. We've done a few projects where we'll, rather than having everybody use a different process or a different form for something, we've kind of consolidated all of the needs into one.
And then you can think about how your organization is currently creating value. And then you also want to think about what is going on in the market at large. So you're going to be competing with other non-social enterprises as well. So you want to consider what your competitors are doing, both social enterprise competitors and non-social enterprise competitors, and then also what your current customers' biggest needs are, because at the end of the day, it is a business and you will need to be selling your services or products. So this is a generic sort of analysis of any type of business called a SWOT analysis. And SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities.
I mentioned, and information about what the committees are working on, and an events calendar, and all kinds of things. So it's sort of a one-stop place where any person in any of our member firms can go to get information about what the group is offering and what might be available for them. So we do.
So strengths and weaknesses are really part of your own firm. And so that's your strengths would be your location, any intellectual property that you have, your human resources, and your financials, anything internal that would be contributing to your business success. And then your weaknesses are any internal factors that would cause you to not be successful. So these would be lags in your own business or mishaps that are embedded in your industry that might result in you not being competitive. So when you're considering strengths and weaknesses, you're looking at internal factors, and then opportunities and threats are external to your organization. So opportunities can be growth in the market where you can take advantage of trends to drive profits and become more innovative. And then threats are any potential risks in the marketplace to your specific industry. So what challenges might be presented? So those could be different regulatory requirements, different working with vulnerable sectors. Those could be things that would be challenges that are external to your organization, but that you would have to overcome to be successful. So different sources of ideas when you're going after you've got that initial list of things, you could look at products or services that directly fulfill your mission. So looking at generating value from your core work already. You can look at expanding into a new product or territory. So you could be offering the same product, but just in a different geographic segment. You could find a new customer segment. So taking your existing product or service and then finding a new customer segment, or examining skills to create something new altogether. And these would be sort of varying in the level of challenge that this would bring to the organization, with obviously the earlier products or services that you're already engaged in, and just expanding to new geographic territory or new customer segments would be the easiest. And then creating a whole new product or service would definitely be a bit more challenging. So you can think about, when you're creating a new product, what else your existing clients might need from you. You might also have some real estate or hard assets, and you can consider how you could use that excess capacity or infrastructure, turn it into a business, or perhaps lease it to another organization so that they could do something that would be in line with your vision or mission. You also might have developed some intellectual property or soft assets, and then you could license that out as a consulting service to other nonprofits or for-profit companies. So I would recommend, when you're starting off early on, to do things as simply as possible to reduce the risk. So if you focused on a familiar product and sent that to a new audience, or you had a new product and then sent that to a existing customer base, that really reduces the risk, as opposed to trying to do several things at once. So if you were trying to find a new market and a new product, that increases your risk, because you have two sort of unknown factors in terms of how you're going to service that customer base and develop that product. So when we are looking in the social enterprise space, when we're screening our ideas, we can look at this stop-go chart and think of the success of an idea in two different dimensions. So you have both the strength of your idea and then how well it fits within the organization. So in terms of strength of the idea, you want to consider if this idea has market potential, and would it have a good business model? Would it advance the mission, either by generating a lot of revenue or by strengthening the delivery of your existing services? So we can rank the strength of the idea on a high-low scale. And then in terms of the fit with the organization, you really want to look internally and determine if your organization could really implement this idea successfully. So even if the idea is really great, if you're missing the resources, either the human resources or physical assets, or some other factor in your organization that would make it really challenging to bring it to market, then that would probably be a no-go idea, just because as great as the idea is, if you're not able to implement it within your organization, that could bring a lot of strain and challenge. So ideally, you want both this financial and social, both the strength of the idea and the fit within the organization to be high, so that you get up into the top quadrant there with a go idea that's both easy to implement and has high impact. So that's your sort of unicorn, if you will. So when you're thinking about how strong your idea is, you want to know if it'll have a strong financial impact, a strong social impact. Is it clearly defined? How developed is it? Is there an existing customer problem? So I always think about bringing a product or a service to the market, not just in terms of what that product or service actually is, but what is the pain point that you're trying to relieve for your customer. So an example that often gets used in pharmaceutical industry, that's my background, so I find it easy to draw on those examples, is when you think about pain relief medication, you aren't just selling the over-the-counter Advil or Tylenol. What you're really selling is pain relief. And so that's what a customer is trying to solve. That's their problem. And then that solution could come through, an over-the-counter oral medication. It could come through an ice pack. It could come through a topical cream pain reliever. So there's many different solutions, but when you're bringing your idea to the market, you want to figure out what the problem the customer has is, or what the gap in the market is, and then how does your product solve that solution or bring that solution to them, and how much are they willing to pay for it. And then as well, what's your competitive advantage? So what does your organization have that other organizations don't have? Of course, we want to have profitability, because at the end of the day, we're looking to generate revenue for the organization to deliver on its social mission. And then considering all of our investment and startup costs and how long that payback period is for your initial investment. So how long can your organization survive before it starts to earn money? And then our relationship with our target customers. How big is this market? Is it a growing market? So we'll talk more about market segmentation and market growth we'll dive into that more in a future webinar, but there's different ways that you can assess the market and whether or not it's a good market to try to enter, and what the barriers to entry might be. And then within the organization, is anyone enthusiastic about the idea? Hopefully not just anyone. Hopefully several people are enthusiastic about the idea, because that's what's going to, those early stages of when things are hard, the more enthusiastic we are, the more committed we'll be to bringing it to the market. And of course, we always want to be aligned with our mission, culture, and values. Are we engaging in our strengths in the organization? Will this create a lot of strain on the organization? Who has the skills to run this business? If there are people who don't have the skills, is it easy to find people with the skills? What are the keys to success? And how much risk is there, and how easy is it to address the risk? So these are the things that we're considering when we're paring down that early list of initial ideas. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the feasibility piece? No, I can't see the chat, so you'd have to just we're a small group, so you can just ask a question if you want to. So then once you have your testing those key assumptions against that initial brainstorm of all your ideas, going through that fit through organization, strength of idea, then we're going to move to the feasibility piece, and we're going to refine and explain and do a bit of market testing, consulting potential customers and evaluating competitors, and perhaps even doing a preliminary market research. So you could do a survey or a small focus group. And at this point, you might want to considering hiring a third-party consultant to do this work. And typically this feasibility study will take 3 to 6 full-time person days. So that's the amount of time that would go into developing a good feasibility study. So I have been searching for funding for feasibility studies. And I always find that when I look for funding, both in the area of social enterprise as well as funding for my own business, I found that there was sort of a lot of small seed funding for initial projects. And then there's a big gap. And then there's quite large grants for once you really get going. And this middle stage where you're trying to do feasibility studies, it can be hard to get this. I see it as a funding gap. Like you've got an idea and you've done some preliminary testing, and then you want to move it to initiation. And I find that gap can sometimes be hard to fill. But I did find through the Community Business Development Corporation, the CBDC, that there is a study category that provides $15,000 to nonprofits, that is a non-repayable contribution. So they'll give you 75% of a project up to $15,000. And through this, you can do feasibility studies, business plan, communication, marketing, etc. And the website link is just on the bottom right there. So if you're interested in doing a feasibility study, this is one source of funding that I've been able to track down, and I'm always looking for more. So hopefully I'll be able to find even more. So when you're going through your feasibility study, you're going to be looking to be strategically aligned. So this is just a review of what we've already discussed. Is the product appropriate? Does it fit with our vision and mission? How difficult will it be to promote, produce? Where are you going to make your good or deliver your service? And how will you promote it? Will you use traditional media streams, social media, word of mouth? What are other organizations or companies doing to promote and produce and deliver similar products or services? And what's the structure that will best move your social enterprise forward? So there can be all different types of business org charts, when you could have a very hierarchical structure with a lot of top-down direction, or you can have a flatter structure that empowers people sort of on the front lines to make decision-making processes. So there's a lot of different things that you can consider when you're designing your social enterprise. And then what skills your board will need and what your staff will need, and who ultimately is going to manage the work. And then you want to look at your market opportunity. So I mentioned that we'll talk more about market segmentation and how things get brought to the marketplace and how to figure out who your target market is. So it's really key to be thinking about that target market segment. So there's sort of the large marketplace is, everyone. And then you pare it down to looking at who your customers are, both in their demographic characteristics. And I'd also say that now people are moving more towards thinking about value graphics. So what do people value spending their money and time on in order to relieve their pain point, or to seek enjoyment, or to enhance their lifestyle? So that's less to do with classic demographics of age, gender, income, and more to do with how people value spending their time and money. And then what are they going to be buying? What's the key element to your product and service? And what's that pain point that customers want to solve? How are you going to address it? Where is your product or service going to be bought and sold or delivered? How large is the market? So you want to figure out both in terms of how much you're going to price, how you're going to price your good or service will depend on both your raw material inputs and all your overhead costs, but then also how many customers you're going to be able to serve. So if you're selling a low value item, but you have a large customer base, then that could be quite profitable, even though each individual product or service isn't that profitable on its own. If you can expand it to a large customer base, you're going to be working with volume. So you want to think about that. And then how often do they purchase? So is it a one-time purchase, a subscription fee? Is it something they're going to be purchasing weekly, monthly, so that you can sort of establish that revenue projection stream over time? And if it's going to be a steady revenue stream, or if there's going to be ups and downs. So you might have something that's seasonal. So you want to plan for your high season and low season. And is the market developed, or they're already you can take advantage of a developed market because other players would have done some of your marketing work for you. So people will be aware of this type of product or service. So you can leverage that. But if you're entering an immature market, not only do you have the challenge of making yourself and your business and your good or service known, but then you have to do the legwork of making it known just in general if the market hasn't matured. So we want to know if the market will have support for the product, what's the niche of the product. And we also want to keep in mind that even though I think people who are interested in supporting social enterprises definitely consider that they're making a worthwhile contribution, ultimately they're still going to want a product or service that's high quality and a good price and have a good experience. So you want to keep that in mind, that you can't just count on the goodwill to sell the product. It has to be competitive with alternative products. So in that context, you're going to be looking at your competitors. What are their strengths and weaknesses? So you can do a SWOT analysis on your competitors to figure out what they're not able to accomplish that you could potentially accomplish. And that gives you some leverage and some competitive advantage. And you also want to determine, how crowded is the marketplace. If it's very crowded, it might be hard to enter. And then that is a threat if the marketplace is too crowded. And then you're going to do your operational capabilities. You want to know how long it's going to take to produce the product. So you'd want to look at your if you need to bring in raw materials, where are you going to be getting them? How long is it going to take them to get to PEI? Which suppliers are you going to use? Are there multiple suppliers? You could do a lot of price comparison there. If you're going to buy in volume, you can often get discounts. How are you going to actually make this happen? Do you need to have a new facility? Are you able to do it in your existing space? Do you need any extra additional management or staff? How are you going to distribute this product or service? And who are your external partners if you need any to help you? Do you need to do any product testing? So this would be when I think about the Reach Foundation with their soap product, they probably needed to do some additional testing when, for different scents or colors or quality of that product. Are there any key steps for milestones? Are there any points where things might be a point where it's a go or a no-go, where you're not able to secure part of your product chain that makes it too difficult to go forward? And then I always think about all the things that could potentially go wrong along the way from the very beginning of making a product or getting ready to deliver a service, and then what could happen along the way and what the impact is. So there's several things that are, when you think about risk, I always think about a small risk. There's like a small risk and a large risk. So you have to consider both the likelihood that something could go wrong, and then if it does go wrong, what's that impact? So even if something going wrong is very, very unlikely, if it has a very, very high risk, then that could be as negative as something that's very likely but not as negative. So you want to be sure that you're considering both the risk level and the likelihood that it could go wrong. And then what can you do to prevent those risks along the way? And then the other piece is you want to consider your financial potential. So this is where you could bring in somebody with some business experience to look at all the startup costs and the operating costs and how you set your price point. So you need to be careful that you're competitive in the market, that you're not too high priced. You also don't want to be too low priced, because if a larger enterprise sees your product as being too low priced and they have the ability to lower their price and then beat you out of the market, then that's a risk. So we've talked about seasonal demand or initial high costs. So you want to have a good projection of your cash flow so that you can save for times where you know your cash flow is going to be low. You want to look at your working capital, what your numbers are going to look like for the first few years. You want to create a break-even point. So at what point will you have sold enough that you're starting to break even and then becoming profitable? So there's various sources of information for all these feasibility studies. So if you're already running a social enterprise, you would have customers. You can talk to other social enterprise operators, other industry associations or funders. You could visit similar enterprises to see how their business works and what their pitfalls are. Reading different industry magazines, reports, and business directories. Of course, there's the internet now, so there's a wealth of information there to look at different competitors and how they price things and what their value propositions are. And we'll talk more about value propositions in a couple of weeks, particularly in the context of the social impact canvas that Andy introduced last week, which is a really a one-page sort of synopsis of a social enterprise, and we'll break it down in more detail and go through all the quadrants in there so that you can see what you need to develop. That's sort of the start of a business plan. And of course, if you are running a service and you have any records of complaints, service requests, that's great feedback for what you could do better and what you might be looking to develop. And then you could consult external financial representatives and business consultants. And then there's the Small Business Advisory Center like the CBDC. So that brings me to the end of the formal presentation. So I will try to escape this slide. There we go. And see if anyone has any questions. Oh, we have more people here now. Oh, I think you're muted. Does anyone have any questions about today's presentation?
That was great. Thanks, Amir.
Great. So the slide deck will go up on our website, and when Alexia gets back, we're going to be launching our YouTube channel. Yeah, so if you have any questions for me, like if you can't think of anything right now, I know it's a lot of information and there's a lot of language around business operations that is not as familiar to nonprofits. So I'm always happy to answer any questions by email if you ever have anything that you want to ask.
I don't think so.
Perfect. Appreciate it, Amir. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their afternoon and happy Halloween.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers.